exist. By objective moral values, I mean moral values which are valid and binding whether anybody believes in them or not. And the claim is that in the absence of God, moral values would not be objective in this sense. So, premise one, if God does not exist, objective moral values do not exist. Many theists and atheists alike agree with this premise. For example, Michael Roos, who's a noted philosopher of science, explains, the position of the modern evolutionist is that morality is a biological adaptation, no less than our hands and feet and teeth. Considered as a rationally justifiable set of claims about an objective something, ethics is illusory. I appreciate that when somebody says, love thy neighbor as thyself, they think they are referring above and beyond themselves. Nevertheless, such reference is truly without foundation. Morality is just an aid to survival and reproduction, and any deeper meaning is illusory. On a naturalistic view, moral values are just a byproduct of biological evolution and social conditioning. Just as a troop of baboons exhibit cooperative and even self-sacrificial behavior because natural selection has determined it to be advantageous in the struggle for survival, so their primate cousins, Homo sapiens, have evolved a similar behavior for the same reason. As a result of socio-biological pressures, there has evolved among Homo sapiens a sort of herd morality which functions well in the perpetuation of our species. But on the atheistic view, there doesn't seem to be anything about this morality that makes it objectively true. And here I think Dr. Stenger seems to agree. He writes, for example, we may call animal morality instinctive, built into the genes of animals by biological evolution. When we include cultural evolution as well, we have a plausible mechanism for the development of human morality by Darwinian selection. On this view, certain actions like rape or incest are not biologically or socially advantageous, and so in the course of human development have become taboo. But that does absolutely nothing to show that rape and incest are really morally wrong. Such behavior goes on all the time in the animal kingdom. The rapist who goes against the herd morality is doing nothing more serious than acting unfashionably, like the man who belches loudly at the dinner table. On a naturalistic view, it's hard to see any reason to think that human morality would be objectively true. But the problem is that premise two, objective moral values do exist. In moral experience, we apprehend a realm of objective moral values that impose themselves upon us. There's no more reason to deny the objective morality or objective reality of moral values than the objective reality of the physical world. Actions like rape, cruelty, and child abuse aren't just socially unacceptable behavior. They're moral abominations. Michael Roos himself admits, and I quote, "The man who says it is morally acceptable to rape little children is just as mistaken as the man who says 2 + 2 = 5. Some things are really wrong. Similarly, love, equality, and self-sacrifice are really good. But then it follows logically and inescapably that 3, therefore, God exists." Number 5, the resurrection of Jesus. Historians have reached something of a consensus that Jesus of Nazareth came on the scene with an unheard of authority, the authority to stand and speak in the place of God himself. He claimed that in himself the kingdom of God had come, and as visible demonstrations of this fact, he carried out a ministry of miracles and exorcisms. But the supreme confirmation of his claim was his resurrection from the dead. If Jesus really did rise from the dead, then it would seem that we have a divine miracle on our hands, and thus evidence for the existence of God. Now, most people would probably say that the resurrection of Jesus is something you just believe in by faith, or not. But there are actually three established facts which are recognized today by the majority of New Testament historians, which I believe are best explained by the resurrection of Jesus. Fact number one. On the Sunday following his crucifixion, Jesus' tomb was found empty by a group of his women followers. According to Jakob Kramer, an Austrian specialist, by far most scholars hold firmly to the reliability of the biblical statements about the empty tomb. Fact number two, on separate occasions, different individuals and groups saw appearances of Jesus alive after his death. According to the prominent New Testament critic Gerald Ludemann, it may be taken as historically certain that the disciples had experiences after Jesus' death in which Jesus appeared to them as the risen Christ. These appearances were witnessed not only by believers, but also by unbelievers, skeptics, and even enemies. Fact number three, the original disciples suddenly came to believe that God had raised Jesus from the dead, despite every predisposition to the contrary. Jews had no belief in a defeated and dying Messiah, and Jewish beliefs about the afterlife precluded anyone's rising from the dead to glory and immortality before the end of the world. Nevertheless, the original disciples came to believe so strongly that God had raised Jesus from the dead that they were willing to die for the truth of that belief. N.T. Wright, an eminent British scholar, concludes, that is why, as an historian, I cannot explain the rise of early Christianity unless Jesus rose again, leaving an empty tomb behind him. Attempts to explain away these three great facts, like the disciples stole the body or Jesus wasn't really dead, have been universally rejected by contemporary scholarship. The simple fact is that there just is no plausible naturalistic explanation of these facts. And therefore, it seems to me the Christian is amply justified in believing that Jesus rose from the dead and was who he claimed to be. And thus we have a good inductive argument for the resurrection of Jesus. And I'll ask the technician to simply bring up these premises one at a time quickly now. I'm not going to have time to read them because I'm short on time. Number 6 is that you can experience God personally. This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments, simply by personally experiencing him. This was the way people in the Bible knew God. As Professor John Hick explains, God was known to them as a dynamic will, interacting with their own wills, a sheer given reality, as inescapably to be reckoned with as destructive storm and life-giving sunshine. To them, God was not an idea adopted by the mind, but an experienced reality which gave significance to their lives. Now, if this is the case, we mustn't so concentrate on the external proofs that we fail to hear the inner voice of God speaking to our own hearts. So, in conclusion, then, we've seen 6 reasons to think that God exists. If Dr. Stenger wants us to believe atheism instead, then he must first tear down all 6 of the arguments that I've presented, and then in their place build a case of his own for why he thinks atheism is true. Unless and until he does that, I think we should conclude that theism is the more plausible worldview.
Thank you, Dr. Craig. Before I go on, I want to remind those people in the back that there are a few seats up front, and don't forget there are seats up on top. Our next speaker tonight is Vic Stenger. Vic Stenger received a PhD in physics from UCLA in 1963. He then took a position on the faculty of the University of Hawaii, retiring to Colorado in 2000. His current position is Adjunct Professor of Philosophy at the University of Colorado and Emeritus Professor of Physics at the University of Hawaii. Dr. Stenger has also held visiting positions on the faculties of the University of Heidelberg in Germany, Oxford in England, and the University of Florence in Italy. He also has been a visiting researcher at Rutherford Laboratory in England and the National Nuclear Physics Laboratory in Frascati, Italy. Dr. Stanger's research career spanned the period of great progress in elementary particle physics that ultimately led to the current Standard Model. He participated in experiments that helped establish the properties of strange particles, quarks, gluons, and neutrinos. He also helped pioneer the emerging fields of very high energy, gamma ray, and neutrino astronomy. In his last project before retiring, Dr. Stanger collaborated on the underground experiment in Japan that showed for the first time that the neutrino has mass. The project leader received the Nobel Prize in 2002 for his work. Vic Stanger has had a parallel career as an author of 9 critically acclaimed popular-level books that interface between physics and cosmology and philosophy, religion, and pseudoscience. His 2007 book, God, the Failed Hypothesis, How Science Shows That God Does Not Exist, was a New York Times bestseller. His last 2 books, which came out in 2009, are Quantum Gods and The New Atheism, Taking a Stand for Reason, Science and Reason. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Stanger.
Well, thanks so much. What a pleasure to be here and to get a chance again to show you why William Lane Craig, as brilliant as he is wrong. I will get to those 6 points during my rebuttal. I'll use my opening statement to make my own position clear. Now, you often hear it said that science is unable to prove or disprove the existence of God. I will argue that science has in fact now reached the point where it can say with confidence beyond a reasonable doubt that God with the attributes of the Judeo-Christian Islamic God does not exist. Surely Dr. Craig will agree that there's no scientific evidence for God. If there were, it would be in the textbooks along with the evidence for quarks and DNA. I claim that this absence of evidence is evidence of absence, because it is evidence that should be there. Science deals with observations. The God of Abraham, Jesus, and Muhammad plays such an active role in the universe that his actions should surely have been observed by now. He is supposed to be responsible for everything that happens in the universe, from every atomic transition in the farthest galaxy to every leaf falling to the ground here on Earth. He listens to every human thought and acts on those thoughts. Let me list the places where the actions of God should have been observed with sufficient likelihood to make the fact that they have not been observed positive evidence that God does not exist. Number 1, God is supposed to talk to people. This is something that can be easily tested. Just have a person who says she talked to God provide some information that she could not possibly have known and is later objectively verified. The sacred books are supposed to be the Word of God, but they tell us the earth is flat, not an oblate spheroid, that disease is caused by sin, not germs, that knowledge comes from eating fruit from a magic tree, not science. In short, it gives us the best thinking of ancient illiterates. But we don't have to look back to books thousands of years ago to seek evidence of revelation. If God talked to people, then he must talk to them now. While many people continue to claim such revelations, not one has been verified. Indeed, many such claims, such as Pat Robertson's yearly predictions, have turned out to be false. In short, the absence of evidence for revelation is evidence for the absence of God. Number 2, the second area where God's actions can easily be verified is with prayer. While we can't expect God to answer every prayer, with billions being submitted every day in thousands of years, you would think that by now a few should have been led to some action that was confirmed scientifically. While some reports have appeared claiming positive effects in scientific experiments, these do not stand up to critical scrutiny. However, reputable institutions such as Harvard, Duke, the Mayo Clinic have carried